So let's see. Let's take the question statement. Right. Here I have a vector. Let's say this 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 and 60. I have two values. Let's say k equals to 3 and x equals to 45. Right. I have these three things. And what do I have to find? I have to find all the k elements which are closest to 45 and which are present in this array or this vector. Okay, so I have to find three elements from this vector which are closest to 45. So my answer for this question is going to be 30, 40 and 50 because 30, 40 and 50 are closest to 45 in this array, right? So how are we judging that? Like how are we saying that these three elements are the only elements, only three elements which are closest to 45? We are doing this on the basis of gap, right? Let's figure out what gap is. Gap is the absolute value of that array value minus x, or let's say rar minus x only, right? So the gap is the absolute value of that array value minus x. So this is going to be my gap. And what does this mean? Let's see. What is the gap between 10 and 45? The gap between 10 and 45 is 35. Right? The gap between 20 and 45 is 25. The gap between 30 and 45 is going to be 15. The gap between 40 and 45 is going to be 5. The gap between 50 and 45 is going to be 5. The gap between 60 and 45 is going to be 15. Okay, so the gap value, let's visualize this on the number line. Okay, so let's say I have 45 here, right? I have 40 here and I have, let's say, 30 here. Right, so I have something like this, say 50 is here and then 60. So this is my number line. Now we can clearly see, let's take a equals to 30, b equals to 40, my x is going to be 45, and let's write the gap here, right? The gap of 45. So the gap between 45 and 30 is 15. The gap between 40 and 45 is 5. So what does this mean? This means that there are, or 40 is 5 units away from 45 and 30 is 15 units away from 45. This means that 40 is 5 units away from 45 and 30 is 15 units away from 45. Now we can clearly see that 40 is much closer to 45 than 30 because its gap is much smaller. So we can say that if the gap is smaller, then that element is going to be closer to my element or the element or the x that I have given. So if the value of my gap is lower, or if the value of my gap is smaller than the other value or the gap of other value, then I can simply say that for 40 and 30, the gap for 40 is 5 and the gap for 30 and 45 is 15. I can simply say that 40 is much closer to 45 because its gap is 5 units only, and which is much smaller than 15, right? So I can conclude on the basis of the gap, like which element is closer to the element that I've given. Okay, let's take another example of A and B. Let's say we have 30 and 60. Okay, my x is 45. So the gap between 30 and 45 is 15 and the gap between 60 and 45 is also 15. So if I make another number line, my 45 would lie somewhere around here. Right? 30 would be here and 60 would be here. Like they would be equally far away from each other. They would be equally far away from 45. This is 15 as well. So we can say that 30 is 15 units away from 45 and 60 is also 15 units away from 45. Now, how can I decide which one is closer to 45? Let's see the question statement. It is saying that A is closer to X. A is closer to X than an integer B. Like A is closer to X than B on two conditions. That if the gap value of A is smaller than the gap value of B, right? I'm given that if the gap value of A is smaller than the gap value of B, I can say A is closer than B. But what if the gap value is same? In this condition, the gap value is same, right? What if the gap value is same? It is saying that if the gap value is same and A is less than B. So for this question or for this part, my answer is going to be 30. And why it is going to be 30? Because 30 is smaller than 60. And since 30 is smaller than 60, but the gap is equal, 30 is going to be my answer for this part. Okay, I hope you understand this part. And I hope you understand the question. Now let's try to discuss an approach. Like how are we going to solve this question? Okay, so in this question, we will use a priority queue. And our priority queue is going to be of max heap type. First, let's say what we are actually doing. We are using a what, how, and why approach. First, we'll discuss the what and how, and you can see that in the later part, we will discuss the why part and why we are actually using a priority queue, why we are using a priority queue of max heap type, right? Why are we doing those things? We will discuss that in the why part. But now let's just focus on what we are actually doing. Okay, so we are making a priority queue of max heap type, and in this priority queue, we would store k elements. We would store k elements only. We are not going to do this for all the elements, even though it will work if we do this for all the elements. If I store 10 and 35, 20 and 25, right? If I store all the elements, 30 and 15, 40 and 15, right? 50 and 5 and 60 and 15, right? If I store all these elements, I'm still going to get 30, 40 and 50 as my answer if I sort them on the basis of, or if I get them on the basis of their gap values, right? But instead of doing this for all the elements, I can also get the answer by just using k elements only. So this is going to be my heap, or this is going to be my priority queue, and this is the peak value. So what we are doing is, first we'll traverse through our array and we will store the first k elements. Okay, because I know that if I have my k elements only, if I have, let's say, 3 elements, right? My k is equals to 3 and I only have 3 elements, then those 3 elements are only going to be my answer. So if there are only 3 elements, then my answer is also going to be only 3 elements, right? So I'm going to store them in my priority queue, and I'll make a pair class for this. I'll make a pair class for this. So 30 and 10 and 35, right? 20 and 25, 30 and 15, right? I'll store them in my priority queue. And since I was using maxi priority queue, I would have 10 and 35 on the top of my priority queue, right? So now I'm at this point. I'm at 40 and 5. Now 40 and 5 comes here, and it sees what is sitting on the top of the priority queue. Now on the top of the priority queue, I have 10 and 35, and 40 and 5, I can easily see that the value of my gap, which is 5, the value of my gap is much smaller than 35. It means that this value, that 40, since the gap of 40 is smaller than 35, since the gap of 40 is smaller than 35, I can simply say that 40 is much closer to 45 because its gap is smaller, right? If my gap is smaller, I can just simply remove this. I can simply remove 10 and 35 from my priority queue, and I can push 40 and 5 in my priority queue, because 40 and 5 is going to be at least bigger than, or at least closer than this element, right? It is going to be at least closer than 10 and 35 because its gap is larger than 10 and 40 and 5, right? So now after this, on the top of my priority queue, I would have 20 and 25, right? Now I'm at here for my next element, which is 50 and 5. Similarly, it will check that 5 is smaller than 25. So it will remove 20 and 25. It will add itself 50 and 5. Right. And now I will have 30 and 15 on the top of my priority queue. Now, look at this very carefully. We have 60 and 15. Right. 60 and 15 is coming. And we will see that 15, both the gaps are equal. Right. And we discussed that if both the gaps are equal, I will say that 30 is going to be my answer. And why is 30 going to be my answer? Because 30 is less than 60. So I will say that if my gap is equal, I will compare them on the basis of their values. And if my value is smaller, I'm just going to keep my answer. So 30 is going to be here, and for 60 and 15 is not going to be added. Right. So I've traversed through this array, traversed through this vector, and I've got my answer. In this priority queue, I've got all the k elements. Right. These are the 3 k elements that I need. And also in the answer part, in the answer, I have to return a vector in which the elements are in sorted order. So I have to return 30, 40 and 50. To return something like this. Okay. I have to return a vector with 30, 40 and 50 as its answer. So let's try to code this, and then as we code, we will understand what we are actually doing. Okay, so let's see. First, we are going to make our class, right? We are using a class, right? So first we'll make our class, which is pair. Now it is public int value equals 0, and then gap equals 0, right? Now I will make a pair. Also this is int argumented constructor, let's say gap, right? This dot val equals to val. Now this dot gap equals to gap. Right. So I've got this pair class. Now I need to make the list. So vector integer list, and I will return this list. Right. But now I have this pair class, but I also need to write the compare function, right? Or the compare class. So after this class, I will write the compare class, public bool operator const pair, right? Then const pair and b. Right? I got this operator, and if a dot gap is equals to b dot gap, then I will return a dot val less than b dot val, or then I will return a dot gap smaller than b dot gap. Now what does this mean? Let's see. In this code, we have a compare function, and in this compare class, we are saying the operator is working in such a way that if the gaps are equal, If the gaps are equal, then I'm sorting them on the basis of, or I'm giving the priority to my values, right? But if it does not fall in that category, it simply means that the gaps are not equal. So I'll return them in the ascending order. Okay, so this is my compare. Now I will make a priority queue. Priority queue pair, right? And compare PQ. Okay, so I have this priority queue. Now I will traverse on my array elements, right? I have to fill my priority queue. So I'm traversing on my array, and now I will check that if my priority queue dot size is less than k. If it is less than k, then it means that I just have to add the first k elements, right? So m is equals to arr of I and abstract value, which is the absolute value, arri minus x. This is the gap. Okay, this is my gap. So the absolute value of the difference of that vector and x, right? So I will push this. Now this means that it is I've added the first k elements, but else after this I will I will add category dot top dot gap. Since I've added the first k elements, right? So I have to check. Now I'm checking that the value which is coming, if the coming value is going to be so for this, let's say I have this priority queue, and on the top of my priority queue I have 40 and, or let's say I have 10 and 35, and 40 and 5 is coming, right? So I will check for that array value what is the gap, and if that gap is smaller than the priority queue top value. Okay, so if priority queue dot top is greater than the absolute value of ari minus x, if this is true, right, if this is true, then I will simply just pop the first element, right, and I will make my new pair, which is array of I abstract or absolute arri minus x, right? I've added this pair to, now I'll add this pair to my priority queue. So push m, right? After adding this pair, I've filled my priority queue, right? So my priority queue consists of the k closest elements. Now I will remove, I will do my work, and I will remove these values. I will remove these values inside my priority queue, and I will add them to my list. Okay, so int, let's say data, that would be equal to priority queue dot top dot value, right? And then I'll pop that value, and then I'll add that data to my list. Okay, this is pushback. Okay, so I have this priority queue. I have my list with all the values. Now I just need to sort the list. So sort arr, or I have a list, right? So list dot begin, comma, list dot end, right? So I'll just simply return the list. Now let's run this code. We are getting an error. Let's see. Okay, so the error was that first I didn't write a semicolon here, and also here I have to write size, right? Okay, so array dot size, this is fine. Pushback data. Okay, now let's run this. It is accepted. Let's submit this. This is the right solution. Now let's also discuss the time complexity for this question. Okay, so Let's see. In this question, in this function, in this for loop, we know that in a priority queue, if I have k elements, in my priority queue, then to add something or to remove something or to perform some task on my priority queue, it will take me log of k time, right? And since I can only perform one task at a time, right, just like a stack, right, I can only perform either push operation or pop operation. So if I can only perform one task at a time, I am performing a total of log k for one task or for one element. I'm traversing through this array, right? And for one element, I'm performing a task which takes log of k time. And since I'm doing this for n elements, my total time complexity is going to be n log k. Okay. So I hope you understand this question. If you don't, I would suggest rewatching the part which you don't understand. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.